Good morning. Why are you so quiet? Let's try this again. Good morning. Yeah, that's more like it, okay? This is a banking conference. A lot of money circulating, so you should all be excited. It's a pleasure to be here in the morning before you all get tired. I'll be back in the afternoon, but the morning session, this session I've been asked to moderate is focused on what's called finance sector reform and governance. We have two speakers. One is Abdulmenan Mohammed. Where is he? Somewhere here? Yeah, come on. And the second one will be Muluneh Ayalew. I think you have the profiles of everybody in the book, so I'm not going to read their CVs or anything. And because we're running very late, we'll stay focused. The idea will be for these two presenters, each one of them have a presentation. Hopefully the PowerPoints would work. The first presentation is focused on monetary policy in Ethiopia. It will be presented by Muluneh, who is the Director, Monetary and Financial Analysis Directorate of the National Bank of Ethiopia. We're going to hear a lot about the NB, I'm sure, the next 2 days. They always get the bad rap, but I think they also do a lot of good things, so we should acknowledge some of the good things that they do. But we're going to hear from him about what are the monetary policies in Ethiopia today, where were we, where are we going to go, what changes are they anticipating, and many other exciting things. So I'm going to ask Muluneh to go up there or sit here, whatever is comfortable for you. You can stand there, or you want to do it from here? Yes. Okay. So once he's done, we'll have a second presentation called The Role of Central Bank and Support Institutions in Financial Sector Reform. So after these two presentations, there will be about a 15-minute Q&A. And the organizers have made it easy for me because this part of the discussion is all in English. But when we bring up the big panel with a lot of high-powered people, we're going to do it in Amharic so that more people can freely converse and be comfortable. So, but this part of it, the presentation is in English and the Q&A is going to be in English. I know there are a few people in the audience who don't speak Amharic, so for their benefit, the rest of us have to suffer, okay? All right, so go ahead and get started. Yeah, well, it's working now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I would present the issue of monetary policy in Ethiopia. Today I would present about monetary policy in Ethiopia, and the contents of my presentation would be, I would have an introduction section, then I will show you the National Bank of Ethiopia as a monetary authority in Ethiopia, then monetary policy regimes in Ethiopia, then monetary indicators in Ethiopia and the neighboring countries. Then we'll have the concluding section. Yeah, monetary economics focuses on the behavior of prices, monetary aggregates, nominal and real interest rates and exchange rates and outputs. And monetary policy is about how central banks manage the liquidity. The liquidity is how much there is in the money supply, which includes cash, credit, and checks. In Ethiopia, monetary policy management is the responsibility of the National Bank of Ethiopia. This is given to the bank as per the proclamation number 591/2008, which states the NB's mandate, NB's purpose as maintain stable rate of price and exchange, foster a healthy financial system, and undertake such other related activities as are conducive to rapid economic development of Ethiopia. This is as per the contemporary proclamation. The preceding proclamation, however, has a slightly different purpose. It says monetary policy is to foster, the purpose of monetary policy is to foster monetary stability, a sound financial system, and such other credit and exchange conditions as are conducive to the balanced growth of the economy. So the difference between these two proclamations is that the second one focuses on rapid economic development and is quite vague compared to the preceding one. It says such other related activities, which is a bit ambiguous. The preceding one says such other credit and exchange conditions, and as are conducive to balanced growth. So the second one focuses more on rapid economic growth, while the previous one is about balanced growth. The other difference between the two proclamations is that it's about credit to government. In the contemporary proclamation, it's more of discretionary. As you know it, monetary policy can be discretionary or rule-based. When it is discretionary, the power to decide is given to individuals, whereas when it is rule-based, individuals cannot adjust as per the conditions. For instance, in the 1994 proclamation, credit to government is, a limit is set to credit to government in quantity, whereas in the second one, no quantity limit is set. To attain its objectives, the NB currently operates with reserve money as operating target and broad money as an intermediate target. So every fiscal year, the National Bank prepares a financial program and sets annual targets for its nominal anchor, which is the reserve money, and consistent with the real fiscal and external sector targets. The monetary regime is that, NB uses to some mainly direct and to some extent indirect monetary policy instruments. Among the direct instruments the bank uses are the credit ceiling. As you remember, during the last fiscal year, the NB has placed a cap on the amount of credit the commercial banks can give to the domestic sectors. The other is interest rate. So the NB controls the minimum interest rate, which is now, it used to be 5%, now it is 7%. The other is, when it comes to the indirect instruments of monetary policy, there are limited indirect instruments, which is one is the reserve requirement, and the NB changes the requirement based on macroeconomic situation. Currently, it's set at 5%. There is also treasury bills. We have 4 types of bills. These bills are government debt instruments. They are used both for fiscal and monetary policy purposes. There is also intervention in the foreign exchange market, but I must admit that this instrument is very limited. So when we see monetary indicators in Ethiopia and the neighboring countries, here is the monetary expansion as measured by annual growth in broad money. As you can see from the graph, the monetary growth is much higher in Ethiopia than the 3 neighboring countries mentioned here over the last 8 years period. So we have witnessed a higher monetary expansion during the last 8 years. Then comes inflation, which is a function of many, of course. As you can see, the inflation from 2010 to 2007, it has been higher in Ethiopia compared to the neighboring countries, but there are some similarities. Around 2011, it was high almost throughout all the member countries. That is because of the drought in East Africa, which this one is, of course, it's a supply side issue, not a monetary policy issue, of course. The other variable related to money is unemployment. Just as economic theory tells us, when unemployment, when the GDP growth is above its potential, unemployment will be below its natural rate, and inflation would be higher. So this is the unemployment rate throughout the member countries. So as we have seen in the previous graphs, inflation and money supply has been higher in Ethiopia. So you might expect unemployment to be the lowest among these countries, but that didn't happen as per the data we obtained from the ILO estimates. As you see, Ethiopia's unemployment is the second largest in the region, whereas inflation and monetary expansion has been the highest. When it comes to GDP growth, here GDP growth has been higher in Ethiopia among all the regional countries. The correlation between inflation and money supply, this was from 2010 to 2011, inflation and M2 growth in Ethiopia has been like this. The correlation coefficient calculated from these two variables has been 0.886. This is so that means they are highly correlated and positively. The correlation coefficient, whereas in Kenya, has been much lower, close to zero, of course, but still positive. In Uganda, the correlation coefficient had been negative, so this implies the presence of other factors not accounted here, as inflation and M2. Whereas in Rwanda, same negative like Uganda. So having seen this, when we come to the conclusion part, money growth is higher in Ethiopia than the neighboring countries. Inflation in Ethiopia is higher and had a higher correlation with money supply. Unemployment rate, as estimated by the ILO, doesn't indicate the monetary stance. As I said before, when there's monetary expansion, it is expected inflation to go up and unemployment to go down, but the unemployment rate in Ethiopia doesn't imply this, as we saw in one of the previous graphs. The GDP growth has been higher in Ethiopia. This is consistent. So sustaining the higher GDP growth and controlling monetary expansion is needed. To achieve this, the NB shall be strengthened and a rule-based monetary policy is needed, compared to the discretionary we saw in the previous slides. So a government, even in good faith, may want to maximize the welfare of its citizens, but it ends up making everybody worse off. A way out is the adoption of rules or commitment. Two commitments regarding monetary policy, that is central bank independence and appointing a conservative central banker. This is all the more true for those countries where there is fiscal dominance. Central bank independence is a way to reduce access to seigniorage and force fiscal adjustment. Okay, that's my presentation. If you have any questions during the Q&A session, we can.
Thank you, Ato Muluneh. I picked up a few interesting points. Obviously, one of them came at the back end of it, where he said central bank independence is key. I think we tend to agree that. Some of you who follow this, even in the United States, Donald Trump is at war with the chairman of the Federal Reserve. He's trying to force him to adjust interest rates the way Donald Trump wants it. So I suppose, and that is in a very sophisticated market. So I'm glad you mentioned it from even the NB's perspective. It does believe that the independence of the central bank is key. I was also intrigued by the word conservative, appointing conservative central bank governors, right? I mean, I'm sure you all picked that up as well. That's a pretty interesting topic. But the one I picked up at the front end of his presentation was this discussion about rapid economic growth versus balanced growth, which is the two pillars of what they apparently have been struggling with as they set monetary policy. So there's a whole bunch of very interesting things that, even though the presentation is brief, it does have a lot of very good thoughts. So something for you to think about. After we finish the second presentation, you'll get a chance to ask him and the second presenter on their presentation. So, in the interest of time, I'll now move on to the next presentation. Help me out how I pronounce your name properly. Abdulmenan. Mohammed, I know. Abdulmenan is a bit... He is the account manager at Portbello Group in the UK. So you came all the way from London? All right, very good. So welcome to the warm weather of Addis. I was there a couple of weeks ago and it was very cold and rainy. So we'll have to charge you for being here in the beautiful weather in Addis. But anyway, he's going to be talking about the role of the central bank and support institutions in financial sector reform. So you got maximum 15 minutes, but if you can make it briefer, that'll be even better.
Speaker. Hello? Is it working? Okay. The speaker, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure you can hear me. The topic of my presentation is the role of the NBE, the central bank. The topic of my presentation is the role of the NBE, the central bank, and supporting institution in financial reforms. The actual paper will be on the conference proceeding journal. This is the main points of the paper. It has sections. One is an overview of Ethiopian financial sector, and the second part is developmental state model and the central bank, and the third one, the last section, is about financial reforms and the role of the central bank and supporting institutions. So I will provide you a context before going to financial reforms and the role of the central bank. I will give you a context what happened in the past 10 years, because Ethiopia has had like two distinct periods from economic vantage point. One is from early 90s to 2005, 2006, and the second one is from around 2006 up to 2018. So my focus is from around 2006 up to 2018. So the data is end of 2008 up to 2018. So first I'll give you some data about the banking sector. As you can see, over the past decade, the banking sector expanded hugely. The insurance sector expanded hugely. And the microfinancing institutions expanded considerably. So if you see from the data, the number of banks increased from 11 to 18 banks, 2 government banks and 16 private banks. And the number of bank branches at the same time increased from 560 to 4,757. And population to branch ratio went down from 147,000 to 20,000, roughly 20,000. And deposits grew at the same time. And the economy has been monetized, which means a large number of people now have access to banking. Millions of people opened bank accounts. So the number of people using cash decreased over the past decade from 26% to 11.7%, which means the amount of money circulating in the economy over broad money, which is the definition, is a technical term in monetary economics. Credit at the same time soared, which is the total loans and advances given to borrowers increased by 8-fold to 444 billion. The amount of corporate bonds issued by state-owned enterprises and other government agencies increased to 291.4 billion from zero. The capital of the banks increased from 10 billion to 85 billion. Microfinance institution at the same time increased from 2837. Their deposit increased, as you see from the data, from 1.56 billion to 33 billion. Credit of microfinance institution went up Total assets of the microfinance institution increased to 67 billion from 5.3 billion. The insurance sector grew from their number of branches increased to 532. Ethiopian Reinsurance established recently with a capital of 500 million birr. Now I will come to the areas of concern of the financial sector. Private banks and insurance companies mainly focus in Addis Ababa. Roughly 40% of the branches of private banks operate in Addis Ababa, which means the majority of the people do not have access to financial services in the rural areas as private banks. The government banks better open branches in the rural areas, in the small towns. Public banks still dominate the financial service industry, especially over the past 10 years. Commercial bank has grew very dominant bank in the country. It mobilized Commercial Bank and Development Bank of Ethiopia. Development Bank doesn't mobilize a lot of deposits, a small amount of deposit, but Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, the public bank, is mobilized 62% of the deposits of the industry and advanced 77% of the credits of the banking sector. Credit provided to state-owned enterprises, federal government, and other government agencies doubled to 61.5%. This tells us the nature of economic policies we follow. Since 2005 to 2006, the government of Ethiopia followed a developmental economic model, which means the government is a primary driver of economic growth, which means the amount of credit given to government enterprises comprise huge amount of the banking sector. CBE, Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, has huge credit exposure to few government organs. Specifically, Ethiopian Electric Power takes around 35% of the banking industry. One bank, one government entity takes 1/3 of the banking sector credit. So this is a very concerning issue. Corporate bonds purchased by EEB, as you can see, 35% of the credit of the banking sector, the whole banking sector, one government enterprise. Development Bank of Ethiopia is struggling with huge NPL. Recent reports indicate that more than 50% of the loans of Development Bank of Ethiopia is struggling with, and the size of agricultural, industrial, and mining loans of private banks represented only 13% of their loan book, which means private banks provide loans to service, merchandise, construction sectors instead of agriculture and manufacturing. Lack of independent central bank, Muluneh indicated, this is a very serious issue. We need an independent central bank for monetary policy and regulation purpose. Capital market and mortgage industry doesn't exist. Treasury bills and money market is highly underdeveloped. Foreign currency shortage, serious issue. Increased borrowing of the government. Now the next topic is the past decade, what it looked like from the overall economic point of view. Debts foreign and domestic went up. Borrowing from central bank increased because the central bank is not independent. The government, when it is short of money, just pressing the central bank money printing press, then uncontrolled amount of money printing underway has gone in the past decade. Financial control is state allocation of finances to finance mega projects, state-owned enterprises, the federal government. CBE increased its outreach in order to mobilize huge funds. DBE emerged as a policy bank to provide funds to prioritize sectors, mainly agricultural and industrial sectors. Interest rates were reduced below market rates to encourage capital investments, especially Development Bank of Ethiopia provides loans to agricultural and industrial sectors at cheap interest rates so that investors would be encouraged to invest in these areas. Most of the time, the interest rate has been below the inflation rate. state-owned enterprises and important sectors were given priority upon foreign currencies. A strict control was placed on outflow of capital abroad. That is. And the next section, the actions of the NB were tuned to developmental state model. Because the government followed a developmental state model, one of the assumptions is if there is a market failure, the government intervenes. So the government intervened over the past decade in a lot of areas, from retail to medtech, large conglomerates. So the government involved hugely in some areas, which has been unnecessary. So the primary role of maintaining prices, the next is the action of NDB were tuned to central state-owned, a state model, developmental state model, because the central bank is not independent. Its action was tuned to the government policies. So one of its primary role of maintaining price stability was sidelined. The primary responsibility of any central bank is maintaining price stability. The second is maintaining the stability of the financial system. Economic development is not the role of the central bank. But because of the economic policies of the government, its primary role of maintaining price stability was sidelined, and the other objective was given, like economic development was given a priority. Directives were issued to bring the financial sector into the fold of the state. For example, one of the directives is the 27% directive, which forces private bankers to invest in national bank bills, 20% of their gross loan disbursements, which is not necessary. I don't believe 5 to 10% is enough, because recent data indicate that more than 5 to 10% is not necessary. And the next topic is recent actions of the government. Several state-owned enterprises were up for sale, as you all know. Many of them, like Ethiopian Airlines, Ethiopian Telecom, were up for privatization, partially, some of them fully. New projects will not be commenced until new corporate governance and the financial status of the existing projects are reviewed, so which means the government will not be starting new projects until the existing ones are reviewed. Public and private partnership proclamation was enacted recently, and new projects was $7 billion announced in energy and road sectors. The logistics sector was opened for foreign investors. Establishment of telecom regulator is underway. Now I'll come to the financial reforms, what financial reforms we need, and what the role of the central bank and other institutions. One of the areas what we need is we need a central bank which is independent from any political interference, any political influence. So if a central bank is independent, central bank means the central bank is, the current central bank is accountable to the government, which is the executive branch of the government, which is the prime minister. We need a central bank accountable to the parliament and accountable to the wider public. Its governors, its directors should be hired on competitive basis, like any professionals. That is a central bank we need. Second, develop a clear regulatory framework and a proactive and predictable regulatory approach. As especially the people in the banking sector know, many times the central bank issued directives unpredictably, a surprising approach to regulation. That is not very good for the banking sector. We need a central bank which has a framework and a predictable approach to regulation. The role of the NBE and the government. Certain areas, the government and the central bank can play a huge role. The financial sector is closed to foreign competition. Gradual financial liberalization and capacity building is essential. The National Bank, when they were asked about why don't you open the financial sector for foreign banks, always they say we don't have the capacity, and the second reason is we don't know, we don't understand the complex financial products they will bring in the country, but we cannot give this justification forever. It has been now 25 years, the new government came to power. We have to start at some point, we have to liberalize gradually and build the capacity. This is the government and the NB work together. And the second point is the treasury bill market is slow growing. That is why the government deficit should be financed by treasury bill, by sale of treasury bill. Normally, this is the normal way of financing government deficit. As we can see, the Ethiopian government is financing its deficit by a treasury bill as well as by printing money, a huge printing money, especially in recent years because of the political problems in the country. The collection of tax has been below targets, so the government printed a lot of money, which is borrowing from the central bank. So we need to have a well-developed treasury bill market. One way of developing the treasury bill market is making the return attractive. Currently it's roughly 1%, 2%, below 2%. So nobody would be interested to invest in treasury bills. If the reward is interesting, the interest rate is higher, people would come to invest in this market. So the government and the National Bank work together to improve this area. And the next topic is mortgage banking and related industry doesn't exist. Creating vibrant and dynamic mortgage industry is essential. We don't have a mortgage industry. Mainly housing is financed by commercial bank. House building, low-cost house building in various schemes are financed by the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia. And the people who buy houses from the government, the various schemes, borrow money from Commercial Bank of Ethiopia. We need to have a vibrant mortgage industry. Private banks should involve in this area. So the government and the National Bank of Ethiopia and the private banks need to work together to develop this industry. And the next is Commercial Bank of Ethiopia has been treated preferentially by the government. You all know, one of the dominant bank. It is roughly, it controls about 60% of the industry's deposit because the government has treated the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia preferentially. So the treatment should be lifted. It should compete like any of the private banks. So the government and the National Bank of Ethiopia should create a fair competitive ground for all the banks. And the next one is capital markets are essential for raising long-term funds, trading on securities, and to foster efficient allocation of financial resources. Establishing capital markets required regulatory framework, physical location, technological infrastructure, and human resources. The formation of capital market is probably one of the topics which has been discussed a number of times over the past 25 years, but nothing has been done. Over the past 10 years, a number of companies formed, issued shares to the public, and many of them, nobody knows where they have gone. Probably 80–90% of them went bust because there has not been organized proper capital market. We need to have a capital market which is very essential for raising finances, trading on securities, for efficient allocation of finances. Yep. Thank you so much. Finished. Thank you.
All right. I think you picked up a lot of very interesting points. I'll share with you mine in 2 seconds. One thing the two panelists agree on is the independence of the central bank. I think that's. But I also picked up on some interesting things about the deficit financing approach of the government, which is 2 pillars. One is printing money and selling treasury bills. Again, that's it. With regards to the gradual liberalization of the financial sector, I know it's been recommended over the years and it's been repeated again. So obviously this is something that a lot of people have thought about. Maybe the NB and the policymakers should look into it. I have a different take on that, but that's not this is not my medium. I'll talk about it some other time. I do agree we need mortgage banks. I actually think beyond just mortgage banks, we need consumer finance companies. We're urbanizing very rapidly. A lot of people, their lives are changing. They need to buy stoves and fridges and other things. I don't think you go to the bank to borrow to buy a fridge. In the developed world, we have very specialized companies. So I think that should also be a consideration. But certainly at the top of the list should be mortgage banks, for sure. Okay? This was one of the very few countries in the world where you're required to pay cash to buy a house, which is not normal. If you do that, and certainly in the U.S., if you have a duffel bag full of cash to go pay for your real estate, the IRS and the FBI and all the government institutions want to know where the hell you got the cash from. Whereas in Ethiopia, even if you buy a car, you do have to have a briefcase full of cash to pay for the dealership. So we need to change. I know it sounds funny today, but this is normal stuff in the rest of the world, and we don't have it. I don't think CBE is a sponsor of this conference, so I suppose he was allowed to rag on CBE. He kept saying they've been given preferential treatment. I'm not going to say anything more than that. And then on capital markets, there's a presentation this afternoon. I'll be talking about it as well. But certainly, I think we all agree it's time to have a capital markets in Ethiopia. And finally, the government has agreed with us. By 2020, we'll have a stock market. So we'll discuss that this afternoon. I want to conclude and then open it up for you to ask questions of the two gentlemen. But I was surprised that there's only 4,700 bank branches in Ethiopia. I thought there were more than that. But regardless, even if we have 20,000 branches for a country of 106 million people, that's nothing. So we have to figure out a different way to address financial inclusion than just rolling out branches. Okay? One final point is, I wasn't aware of this, that 1/3 of all bank credit goes to one company. Yep. That was very surprising, to be honest with you, that EPCO gets 1/3 of all the credit financing in this country. We do admire what they've done, and obviously it's very good. Otherwise, this light won't be on today if they hadn't invested in the power infrastructure. But that, in my business, we call it concentration of risk. If you allocate 1/3 of your borrowings or your capital to one customer, as good as EPCO might be, now they're called EEP and EEU, but I was just a bit surprised about that data, that being that it is. So in summary, that was what we got from our second presenter. So why don't we do this? We'll have, say, 10 minutes for you to ask questions. And I think we can, as I said, the questions could be in Amharic, okay, so that most people can participate. So can we have 10 minutes of questions? If you don't, then we'll wrap this up and we move on to the panelists who will come up here. Is that fair? So does anybody have any questions, especially for NBE, right? Yes, I see 1, 2, oh man, I see a lot of hands. So why don't we start with you, Takashita?
Thank you for both presenters. The presentation was quite insightful, especially that presented by Mr. Abdulrahman really can serve even like a basis for further research, was quite detailed information. Having said that, I want to ask something about these diaspora Ethiopians. I know that the law doesn't allow our diaspora Ethiopians to buy shares in our banks. But you didn't comment on that because I believe this is not really like liberalizing the banking sector to foreign banks. It's like what considering our diaspora, number one, to save money and also for the country to attract foreign currencies. And on top, also our diaspora, as you know, are allowed to do anything in business except for in the election and such politics. Otherwise, I was expecting your comment on this, that the Ethiopian government, the national bank, should allow our diaspora to buy shares in the banks for many reasons. Thank you.
Why don't we'll take a few questions and then we'll get them to answer, okay?
Thank you very much. ያው በአማርኛ ማቅረብ ይቻላል ስለተባለ በአማርኛ አቀርባለሁ። በመጀመሪያው አኑዋል ኢስት አፍሪካን ፋይናንስ ሰሚት ላይ ሁለት ጥያቄዎችን ጠይቄ ነበር። አንደኛው ሚሲንግ ፋይናንሻል ሰርቪስስ የሚል ነገር በአቶ ዘመዴነህ የቀረበ ይመስለኛል እና ያም ካፒታል ማርኬት ነው የሚል ነበር። እኔ የጠየቅኩት ፉል ፍሌጅድ የሆነ ኢንተረስት ፍሪ ባንኪንግ አልተጠቀሰም። ያኔም ስጠይቅ ባንኮች ኮንቬንሽናል ባንኮች ኮንቬንሽናል ፋይናንሻል ሰርቪስ የሚሰጡ ዊንዶ አላቸው የሚል ነው። እኔ የጠየኩት ፉል ፍሌጅድ ነበር። እዚህ ጋር አልተነሳም። ያኛውስ እንደ አንደኛው እንትን ሊነሳ አይችልም ወይ ነው። ሌላው ያኔ የጠየኩት የኢትዮጵያ ፋይናንሻል ሴክተር ለፎሪን ባንኮች ዝግ ነው እና ለምንድን ነው የማይከፈተው የሚል ነበር። ዛሬ አይ ቲንክ ተነስቷል በአቶ አብዱልመናን ሐምዛ መሐመድ ሐምዛ። አይ ቲንክ ያ ጥሩ ነገር ነው ብዬ አስባለሁ። በጊዜው የተመለሰልኝ ካልተሳሳትኩ በኦሮሚያ ኢንተርናሽናል ባንክ ፕሬዚዳንት ለአካዳሚክ ፐርፐዝ ነው ያነሳው የሚል ነገር ነበር። አይ ቲንክ ይሄ ሞር ሲሪየስ የሆነ ኢሹ ስለሆነ አድሬስ መደረጉ ጥሩ ነው ብዬ አስባለሁ እና ሁለቱ ናቸው ያሉኝ።
ሌላ ጥያቄ አለ? እዚህ
እሺ፣ አመሰግናለሁ። የብሔራዊ ባንክ ነጻነትን ኢንዲፔንደንሲውን ሁለቱም ፔፐር አቅራቢዎች አድሬስ አድርገዋል። የብሔራዊ ባንክ ኢንዲፔንደንሲ ስንል ምን ማለታችን ነው? ምክንያቱም የብሔራዊ ባንክ እንግዲህ ባለ የሴንትራል ባንክ ኢንዲፔንደንሲ ሬጉላቶሪ ኢንዲፔንደንሲ ሊሆን ይችላል፣ ሱፐርቫይዘር ኢንዲፔንደንሲ፣ ኢንስቲቱሽናል ኢንዲፔንደንሲ እና በጀተሪ ኢንዲፔንደንሲ ሊሆን ይችላል። ስለዚህ ብሔራዊ ባንክ ኢንዲፔንደንሲ ክሪቲካል ነው ስንል የትኛውን ኢንዲፔንደንሲ ነው? which ኢንዲፔንደንሲ were activated? ሌላው ላነሳ የፈለኩት ነገር ስለ የፕራይቬት ሴክተር ፋይናንሲንግ በተለይ ለአግሪካልቸር እና ለማይኒንግ እና ለኢንዱስትሪ ከ13% አላደገም። ኦልሞስት የገቨርንመንታል ፋይናንስ ነው የሚበዛው የሚል ነገር አለና ምንድነው ቻሌንጁ? ለአግሪካልቸሩ ለማይኒንግ እና ለኢንዱስትሪው ፕራይቬት ሴክተሩ ፋይናንስ እንዳያደርግ ቻሌንጁ ምንድነው? ምንድነው ቻሌንጁ? ሌላው የካፒታል ማርኬት አስፈላጊነት ያው አጀንዳ ከሆነ ቆይቷል። ነገር ግን አንድ ትልቅ ኢሹ አለ። ያ ኢሹ ይሄ ካፒታል ማርኬት ለኢትዮጵያ ሚሲንግ ኢንስቲትዩሽንስ ነው ብለን የተለያዩ ሪሰርቾችንም እየሰራን ነው። እነዚህ ሪሰርቾችንም ለመንግስት አድሬስ አድርገናል። ይሄ ካፒታል ማርኬት ኮምፐልሰሪ ኢንስቲትዩሽን ነው ለፎር ፋይናንሻል ኢንስቲትዩሽንስ ወይ ሰብስቲትዩት የሚለው ነገር እንዴት ታዩታላችሁ? እዚህ ኮምፐልሰሪ ኢንስቲትዩሽንስ ኦር ሰብስቲትዩት ኢንስቲትዩሽንስ ነው የሚለውን ኢሹ እንዴት ታዩታላችሁ? እንደ ተመራማሪ ነው። ሌላው ላነሳው የፈለኩት ነገር ብሔራዊ ባንክ ላይ አሁንም የተነሳ ነገር እንደ ሞኔታሪ ኢንስትሩመንት የተነሳ ክሬዲት ሲሊንግ እዚህ ኢንስትሩመንት ሞኔታሪ ኢንስትሩመንት ነው ወይ? ምክንያቱም ቤዚካሊ ሞኔታሪ ኢንስትሩመንት የሚባሉት ከፕራይስ ጋር ተያይዞ ከኤክስቼንጅ ሬት ከኢንትረስት ሬት ጋር የተገናኘ ኢሹ ነው እና ብሔራዊ ባንክ የክሬዲት ሲሊንግን እንደ ሞኔታሪ ኢንስትሩመንት ወስዶ አድሬስ ማድረጉ ዚት ሳይንቲፊክ እና ቪዚብል ነው ወይ የሚሉትን ጥያቄዎች ለማንሳት ነው። አመሰግናለሁ።
እሺ፣ አመሰግናለሁ። For those who want to follow the discussions, you can listen to it on Channel 2. There's a translation on Channel 2 from Amharic to English, okay? And then we're going to add a couple more questions and then we'll go. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, about the allow me this benefit. But just I would like to ask about the capital market. I think that has been suggested in many occasions. Capital market is important and we have to do it. 28 countries in Africa they have capital markets, but most of them they have companies listed, less than 10. Capital markets working in Africa, there are very few of capital markets functioning properly. South Africa, Egypt, something. Are you really recommending capital market for this country? What are the clinical requirements for the capital markets to operate? How many of the contractual saving institutions are operating in this country effectively? A country who cannot mobilize 1% of GDP in the life insurance policy, where are the contractual saving institutions? Where are the critical infrastructures? Is there any empirical evidence? Is there any empirical evidence that says capital markets develop or better than banking sector development? There are many countries who have been developed without capital markets. I think before recommending this massive financial, I think we have to listen what capital markets have done in Africa. I think it's a very critical issue because there is no empirical, to my knowledge, there is no empirical evidence that says capital markets can develop a country better than banking. I think better let's focus on our banking sector development for the time being, enhance our institutions so that capital markets will be an icing on a cake. Thank you.
All right, I think we've gathered enough questions. So can you take the ones that are relevant to NBE and then the ones that you think you can answer? But make them very brief because we have to move on to the next one, okay? I'll answer the question about the capital markets at the back end.
I think very few are relevant to my presentation. No, not really. Okay. Yes, one is to start from the last question. It was about capital markets, right? Our chairman has promised to answer, but let me say a few things about it. It's the capital market consists of both equity and debt market, right? So when we are saying the capital market, we are referring to both the debt market, where we can buy and sell bonds and other borrowing instruments, plus the equity market when shares could be traded. So we see shares being traded in Ethiopia, but they are not being traded in in a legally acknowledged platform. So we need to develop a platform for that. I understand your concerns. You are right, we do not have a strong life insurance sector, that's true. And we may not have strong contractual saving institutions. That's right, I agree. But we do also have the pension funds, which are mobilizing huge resources, even though there are some structural issues with the pension funds. Plus, the other issue is, as Mr. Abdulmenan mentioned, government financing has depended mainly on central bank and other state-owned enterprises. This is not a sustainable means of financing government debts. So we need to have a debt market for government instruments so that the government can mobilize resources in a more sustainable way. So that is why we wanted to have the debt market established. In that case, the burden on the central bank would be reduced, and central bank will have less pressure, and it can manage its monetary policy better than what is today. So that would help us manage the domestic inflation. Managing the domestic inflation will have a direct impact on the foreign exchange we are facing. So if there is a stable level of prices, our exporters will be more competitive in the international market, and they can generate more foreign exchange. And just maybe as the Mr. Chairman said, maybe we can discuss it later, or so this is what I want to say. The other is, I would like to react is the credit ceiling. Yes, credit ceiling is a monetary policy instrument, but when we say monetary policy, it targets on the quantity or the price of money. The interest rate is the price for money, whereas the credit, placing a credit cap is controlling the quantity of money. But it must be used very carefully. as I tried to show in my presentation, when there is monetary expansion, that implies the GDP grows beyond its potential and a very low unemployment rate. A very low unemployment rate compared to its natural rate. Unemployment is advised to be in its natural rate. So whenever unemployment is below its natural rate, it's going to be inflationary. So to reduce the inflationary pressure, to mitigate the inflationary pressure, the central bank usually uses the credit ceiling, but having the credit ceiling policy will have negative consequences as well. That was your concern, I think. That's right. It will lead us to higher level of unemployment and all those factors. But economy should grow in a balanced way. In order to have a balanced growth of the economy, you need to control your monetary expansion. So the credit ceiling is one instrument to do that. I think these are the questions. If I've missed anything, maybe I can come back later.
Yep. One of the questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the questions directly put forward to me, which is about why foreign nationals of Ethiopian origin are prohibited from investing in the financial sector. In the investment proclamation, there are sectors which are restricted for locals. And recently, a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, the National Bank of Ethiopia suddenly came up with a letter to the bankers saying, check the nationality of you shareholders, and there was a lot of controversy around this area. And I'm one of the guys who wrote on the newspaper, this is contrary to Ethiopian commercial law proclamation, about the procedure. I don't understand why the National Bank prohibits Ethiopians, foreign nationals of Ethiopian origin investing in the financial sector. Probably the liberalization can start from this. Ethiopians who have foreign nationals should be allowed to invest in the financial sector. I don't see any justification prohibiting them to invest in the financial sector. So the National Bank of Ethiopia should be asked to relax the rule for Ethiopians, because I don't see any justification to prohibit them. This is my question. Second is on fully fledged non-interest-free banking. There was an idea some years ago to set up a bank purely on non-interest basis. I don't know, for some reason, the whole idea terminated, and all the commercial bankers were told to open interest-free windows for those who are interested to get the service in this area. I believe the National Bank, if relaxes the rule, if anyone interested to invest in this, specifically in this area, I don't see any problem. Interest-free banking almost all over the world, in Europe, everywhere, every country, purely there are banks operating on non-interest, which is compliant with the Sharia rules. There are many banks operating in Europe. If the National Bank relaxes the rules, so people can invest in this area, and I don't see specifically any problem related to this area. And what else? And there are about central bank independence. One of our delegates asked, what does it mean, central bank independence? Monetary policy, supervision, regulatory, or budgetary, if I'm not mistaken, your question. I believe there is no central bank probably Federal Reserve is one of the central banks in the world which has the discretion to set objectives of the central bank. One of the bank. I don't see any central bank in the world fully independent. The government sets objectives of the central bank. Only Federal Reserve sets its own objectives. But the rest of the countries, the government sets the objectives of the central bank. In Ethiopia, the government put the objectives of the central bank, which is maintaining the stability of money, maintaining the stability of the financial system, contributing economic development, foreign exchange issues. That's understandable. That's reasonable to put an objectives of the central bank in a proclamation. The government can put a target, like in England, the government puts a target like 2% interest rate, inflation rate. So the central bank is free from to use monetary policy instruments to achieve this target. When I'm saying central bank independence, we need to have independent central bank to achieve a target set by the government. Let us say 5% inflation rate. So it's up to the central bank to use any monetary policy instrument to achieve that target. The central bank needs to have this freedom. In terms of budget, the central bank is like a profit-making entity currently, I'm sure. It gets income from different services. If you see the profit and loss account of the central bank, it is one of the most profit-making government entity in Ethiopia. So budgetary issue is not an issue. Regulatory supervision, central bank has the freedom currently, but in certain areas, it doesn't have the freedom. For example, the government appoints the governor, the vice governor, almost all the board. We don't need politicians to sit in the board of the central bank. They need to be independent people, and they need to be appointed for a certain period of time, and the senior staff of the central bank should be competitively hired, no political intervention. So the central bank in monetary policy formation, independent, supervision, regulation, independent. Budget, currently, I'm sure it is independent in budgetary matters. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think these were enlightening answers. I'm not going to add anything to it. I just promised I would talk about very briefly about capital markets. He was asked, there's no empirical evidence to support the need for capital markets. I think you need to look at capital markets as one of the bouquet of financial service offerings or options, as opposed to being mutually exclusive. It's not like you have capital markets and the banking sector is undermined or eliminated. No. I think in all countries where capital markets exist, the commercial banking, the normal banking sector also is vibrant. You need both. If you are willing to stick around this afternoon, I have a presentation that actually addresses the issues that you raised, but we need to see it. Anyone who's an accountant knows for every debit there has to be a credit. So you go to the bank today, you want to borrow, the bank says, where's your equity? Right? And one of the challenges we face in Ethiopia today is how do we, in a formal, organized manner, raise capital? This is a bankers, there's a whole bunch of bankers in this room today. I can assure you, every single bank in Ethiopia today can unleash billions of birr of illiquid capital by just offloading through an IPO their shares on the stock market. That by itself gives stimulus to the market, that gives stimulus to the banks themselves. So don't look at it as the panacea, as a cure to cancer by itself, it's not. But it's one of the many options that we need to have for very developed. You're absolutely right. There are 28 countries in Africa who have stock markets. But we are the largest emerging economy in the world today that does not have a stock market. That should tell you something, right? So I know we can debate a lot of these things, but we have a fantastic panel coming up. So I want to give a round of applause to my two panelists and invite the next panelist to come up here. Thank you very much.